Alright, so I want to thank everybody for asking some questions on Facebook. We're going to get to answering those. First I want to thank my sponsors, At Large Nutrition, Mark Bell Slingshot, Anderson Powerlifting, Sports Nutrition Center, and then Jeron for coming out and training with us from Savage and getting prepped up for our seminar coming up on February 22nd over at his gym. So if you have any questions about that, hit him up or myself and we'll get you all dialed in. So Jeron's going to take the first question here from Dave.
Alright, so Dave wants to know what to consider when coming back from a pec tear. And you know, I've dealt with this a couple of different times. The main thing that you want to do is progress back into your old training weight and your training volume very slowly and pay attention to how things feel. There's not any real replacement for actually putting your ego aside and paying attention to your body. So what I would do is kind of start just easing yourself back into the movement. Depends a lot on where you have the pec tear. Typically it's up in the pec minor, so I would stay away from incline work for a little while. Really just work on something that's full range of motion, gets a nice stretch across the muscle but doesn't put a lot of stress on the joint.
Tiffany was talking about foot position and how one foot seems to be forward or more forward than the other. First off, I think leg drive is completely overrated, but that's just me. But Tiffany, to seriously answer your question, I think a lot of people overthink where their feet need to be. They're on there driving from their heels or on their toes, tucked way back. Typically for women, that they tuck their feet way back to gain a bigger arch, and sometimes that's not beneficial. Sometimes you lose the amount of leg drive you potentially could get from having your feet tucked all the way back. So what I recommend is sticking with something that's the most comfortable, and if your one foot is a little bit far forward, if it's not messing your technique of bringing the bar down and then driving back up, then I wouldn't worry about it. Just don't overthink it. It's the same thing with people and their grips, you know, how wide or narrow the bar should be. You know, you overthink it and you're going to screw it up. So just focus more on making sure the bar comes down and is hitting exactly where you want it to hit, and then you have fast speed coming off your chest.
And another way that I would even take a look at it too, is just set your feet before getting under the bar and unracking the weight. When I set up, I come in through the back of the bench and I just make sure that I have the feet nice, even, and planted. And I'll set up the first time and make sure that my eye is relative to the bar where I need to be, and then I'll come out of that position and look where my feet are set and try and block into that position. That way I know where my feet are before I even start to lift. And that seems to help as well. How to incorporate back from Tony?
Tony.
From Tony. It kind of depends. There's a lot of ways to look at it as far as incorporating your back into your press or incorporating back training into your bench as accessory work. I think that the lats are very important with benching as far as being able to create stability in through the shoulders. If you're looking for a way to cue that on your bench, as you come up, start to tuck the elbows and almost imagine that you're bending the bar in a U shape, and that will get the lats pulled nice and tight, so that way as you drop the bar down it keeps the shoulder nice and stable.
Yeah, and I think there's some different ways. If you watch Chris Duffin's video he recently did on activating your lats, benching, that's a very useful video. But then also doing reverse band benching, if you're having trouble activating your lats or feeling if you're using your lats, do the reverse band benching. As you bring them down, you're going to have to kind of pull the bar down to you, and so it'll help give you that cue to activate your lats. But as far as training and setting up, they're super important, and your back needs to be strong. Tab hits, he never hits the incline or decline, and should I? Yeah, I never decline. I've never declined bench. I don't find it useful. Now, if that's the only thing you had access to, then do it. If it's the only thing you're used to doing, you don't have a spotter or whatever, and you feel comfortable with it, then do it. It's better than nothing. But from my personal opinion, I never decline. I don't find it useful. Incline, I typically will try to hit the incline about once a month, and I'll do it after a heavy bench session, and I'll usually try to load it up to a heavy 5 rep. So I'm already kind of warm. I'm not messing around warming up with 1, 2, 3 plates. I'll typically just go straight to 4 plates and try to knock out 5 to 8 reps and do it for a couple of sets. And part of that is just to kind of get a little bit of my front delts wore out, like if I'm not going to do dead pin presses that training session. So Incline, you know, I don't find it super useful, but at least once a month I'll hit it. Dan, you're 4 weeks out, and how does your program look as far as boards and bands and stuff? Well, so a couple of things I talked about in the past. I don't find boards for raw benching to be useful, and the reason is because the reason people are missing weights and missing their lifts is the speed off of their chest. They're not missing it because their lockout isn't strong. That's a geared philosophy. The geared philosophy is you get the spring out of the shirt and you get to here and you fail, and it's because you're not used to locking out 700 or 800 pounds. The idea behind raw benching is the only way you're going to fail a lift is if the speed off your chest isn't there. So I typically don't use bands at all during my training session, only because I don't like the way it feels on my shoulders, and especially the program that I have set up, going heavy every other week. It just doesn't make sense to use bands on a regular basis. So 4 weeks out, I do nothing different. The Alpha project is geared towards doing the same thing year round, which is going heavy 1 week, light the next week. And that does not change. I just gear it towards when my competition is coming up, I'll obviously go light the week before. So nothing changes. Boards and bands I typically don't use. Dead pin presses today, Jeron and I did some added chains to it, and that was a lot of fun. So adding some of those tools to maybe some assistance lifts would be the idea instead of your main bench.
All right, Mike had a question about how to incorporate floor presses and what kind of rep ranges and sets to use for that. I actually don't use floor presses anymore. I've found that there's a lot more carryover with using things like the dead pin press. I've even used actually a heavy board press to kind of simulate that, but to get myself just psychologically used to holding more weight and just still working that short range of motion. Between that and then just the dead pin press, I find a lot more carryover personally.
Yeah. If I do any type of floor pressing, it's going to be with dumbbells, and it's going to be a pause at the bottom. That's all I'm focusing on, is just to incorporate some speed. But again, I do those maybe once every 3 months. I don't do them regularly. I don't find the carryover to be as beneficial as the dead pin presses. So, Mike, I'd probably skip that altogether and just work on increasing your bench. Randall said, what is the best grip? So this is kind of the same kind of question that Tiffany had, is with your foot placing, it doesn't matter. That's what it boils down to. I think typically raw benchers are going to be stronger with a more narrow grip, but Jeron has super long arms, and when he goes narrow, he could be adding 4 or 5 inches to his press, and obviously we want to lessen his range of motion. So for him, he feels comfortable. He doesn't get the nagging pain in his front delt or pec bringing the bar down with wide grip. But for me, I'm pinky on the ring and as narrow as I can, because I feel like I'm stronger kind of tucked in right here. And the way that I explain it to people is, if you're going to shove somebody, if Jeron pisses me off and I'm going to shove him, I'm not going to shove him this way, I'm going to shove him this way. And that's just kind of where I feel stronger. And for me, when I'm benching, coming in here, when the weight starts to get difficult, I can flare my elbows out and continue to press. And it just feels more comfortable out here. I'm not as comfortable doing that. So again, it's just a preference. If it feels better, then stick with it wide. If they're feeling stronger narrow, then stick narrow. It's really a personal preference. So.
And there's some benefit to training multiple different grips. You don't want to have a glaring weakness. So find the position where you feel the most comfortable, but then also consider using some different grips as accessory work for that.
Good.
That's it.
That's it.